After 8 years in my house, my daughter and her husband won $95 million, then he tried to kick me out. For 8 years, my daughter and her husband lived in my house. 8 long years. 8 years of sharing meals at the same kitchen table. 8 years of groceries I paid for. 8 years of water, electricity, internet, and property taxes that came out of my bank account. And not once did I ask them for rent. Because they were family. But the day they won $95 million, the man I treated like a son looked me in the eye and told me it was time for me to move out. Out of my own home. And for a moment, my own daughter didn't stop him. The house that built my life. My name is Richard Lawson. I'm 66 years old, retired now, and the house I live in is the same one I bought 35 years ago. Back then, I was a young man with a worn-out pickup truck, a toolbox full of second-hand tools, and a dream bigger than my paycheck. I worked as a mechanic during the day. At night, I cleaned office buildings downtown. 7 nights a week. I did that for almost 6 years just to save enough money for the down payment. I remember the day I finally got the keys. The realtor handed them to me with a smile and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Lawson. It's yours." I stood in the empty living room for nearly 10 minutes. The house wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small backyard, but to me, it felt like a palace. Because it meant stability, and more importantly, it meant my daughter Emily would grow up with something I never had. A home. Emily's childhood. Emily was 5 years old when we moved in. The moment we stepped through the door, she ran through the empty rooms laughing. "Dad, it's huge." She slid across the hardwood floors in her socks and declared the living room her ballroom. That house became the center of our lives. Birthday parties in the backyard. Christmas mornings by the fireplace. Science projects spread across the kitchen table. School photos taken on the front porch every fall. Every important moment in our lives happened in that house. I fixed the fence when it broke. I repainted the walls every few years. I planted a tree in the backyard when Emily turned 10. And as the years passed, that tree grew just like she did. So when Emily grew up and eventually married Jason, I believed the future would unfold the way it usually does. Children grow up. They move out. They build their own lives. For a while, that seemed exactly like what was happening. Meeting Jason. The first time I met Jason, he shook my hand firmly and called me, "Sir." He had a confident smile and an easy charm. Emily looked happy around him. That was enough for me. Jason worked for a logistics company and seemed responsible. When they got married, they moved into a small apartment across town. Emily called me every week to check in. Sometimes they came over for dinner. I thought they were building a good life together. But 2 years later, everything changed. When life fell apart for them. Jason's company went through layoffs. One Friday afternoon he came home with a cardboard box holding the contents of his desk. His job was gone. Emily still had her part-time job at a dental clinic, but it wasn't enough to support both of them. Bills started piling up. Their rent increased. Credit card debt followed. Then one evening there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Emily stood there looking exhausted. Jason stood beside her, staring at the ground. "Dad," Emily said quietly, "can we talk?" We sat down at the kitchen table. She explained everything. They were behind on rent. Their lease was ending. They didn't know where they were going to live. Then she asked the question every parent eventually hears. Could we stay here for a while, until things get better? She looked embarrassed even asking. I didn't hesitate. Of course you can. That's what parents do. They help when their kids need it. I cleared out the guest room that same night. None of us expected what would happen next. A temporary stay that lasted years. The plan was simple. They would stay a few months. Jason would find another job. They'd save money and move back out. At first, things went exactly like that. Jason found a temporary delivery job. Emily kept working at the dental clinic. We ate dinner together most nights. Sometimes we watched movies in the living room. It felt like having a full house again. But months passed. Then a year. Then another. Jason changed jobs several times. He tried starting a small online clothing business. Then he got excited about cryptocurrency. Then he talked about investing in real estate. Each idea started with enthusiasm. Each one failed. Meanwhile, The bills kept coming. Property taxes, utility bills, groceries, internet. I paid for everything. Emily offered to contribute sometimes, but I usually waved her off. "You're saving money," I'd tell her. Jason rarely said much about it, but sometimes he made comments that stuck with me. One evening he was standing in the living room looking around thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "houses in this neighborhood are worth a fortune now." I shrugged. "Maybe, but I'm not selling." He nodded slowly. "Well, someday Emily will inherit it anyway." Something about the way he said it made me uneasy. But I ignored it. Looking back now, maybe I shouldn't have. 8 years later, time moves faster than you think. Before I realized it, Jason and Emily had been living with me for 8 years. 8 years of shared dinners. 8 years of birthdays. 8 years of believing we were still a close family. Then one ordinary Tuesday changed everything. The lottery ticket. I was sitting in the living room watching the evening news when the front door burst open. Emily ran inside screaming, "Dad, Dad, where are you?" Jason rushed in behind her holding something in his hand. They both looked completely shocked. "What's going on?" I asked. Emily's hands were shaking. "We won," she said. "Won what?" Jason handed me a small piece of paper. "A lottery ticket. We won the jackpot." I looked down at the numbers. Then I looked back at him. "How much?" Emily started laughing and crying at the same time. $95 million. For a moment, the room went silent. 95 million. It didn't even sound like a real number. Jason started laughing like a man who had just discovered treasure. Emily hugged me tightly. "We're rich, Dad." That night we celebrated. Pizza boxes filled the kitchen table. Jason opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for years. Music blasted through the house. At one point Jason threw his arm around my shoulder. "Don't worry, Richard," he said with a grin. "You'll always be taken care of." I laughed. I've been doing all right so far. But I appreciated the thought. At least, I thought I did. The change. The weeks after the lottery win were chaos. Lawyers started calling. Financial advisors scheduled meetings. Reporters tried contacting them. Jason quit his delivery job the next morning. Emily left the dental clinic 2 days later. Suddenly they were talking about mansions, luxury cars, and world travel. And honestly, I was happy for them. But slowly, something inside the house started to change. Jason became distant. Emily spent more time in their room whispering with him. Sometimes conversations stopped when I walked into the kitchen. The house felt different, colder, like I didn't belong there anymore. Then one afternoon Jason knocked on my bedroom door. "Hey Richard, got a minute?" "Sure." He stepped inside and sat down casually. "We've been discussing our future." "That sounds good," I said. "And we think it's time for a major change." I nodded. "You're moving out." Jason smiled. "Oh yeah, that makes sense." Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "We're planning to sell this house." I stared at him. "What?" He leaned back comfortably. "We're going to buy a much bigger property." "That has nothing to do with this house," I replied. Jason looked confused. "Well, Emily owns half of it." The room went silent. "No," I said calmly. "She doesn't." Jason chuckled. "She's lived here for years. That doesn't make her the owner." His smile faded. "We'll handle the paperwork." That was the moment I realized something was terribly wrong. The confrontation. 2 days later, Jason and Emily sat me down at the kitchen table. Emily wouldn't look at me. Jason spoke. "We've been discussing living arrangements." I crossed my arms. "All right, it would be best if you moved out by the end of summer." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. "You want me to leave?" Jason nodded. "You don't need such a large house." Emily finally spoke quietly. "Dad, we'll buy you a condo." 8 years. 8 years they lived in my home. And now they were asking me to leave. "You lived here rent-free for almost a decade," I said slowly. Jason shifted in his chair. "And now that you're rich, you want me gone?" "We're offering to buy you a place," he replied. I laughed bitterly. "This house is in my name." Jason leaned forward. "We'll see about that." The lawsuit. A week later a letter arrived from a lawyer. Jason had filed a legal claim. His argument was that Emily had contributed financially to the household and therefore had partial ownership. It was absurd, but it still hurt, because my daughter allowed it. I hired my own lawyer immediately. 2 months later, we stood in a courtroom. Jason looked confident in his expensive suit. The judge reviewed the documents. Mortgage records, property title, 35 years of payments in my name. After 10 minutes the judge closed the file. This case is very clear. He looked directly at Jason. The property belongs entirely to Mr. Lawson. Jason's jaw tightened. Emily started crying. The judge continued. Winning the lottery does not give you the right to take someone else's home. Case dismissed. The aftermath. 2 weeks later they moved out. No apology. No goodbye dinner. Just packed boxes and silence. The house felt empty afterward. But strangely peaceful. For the first time in 8 years. It was my home again. 6 months later, my phone rang one evening. It was Emily. Her voice sounded broken. Dad. Jason left. Apparently the money had changed him more than anyone expected. He spent millions on cars, gambling, and bad investments. Their marriage collapsed. Emily asked if she could visit. When she walked through the front door, she looked exhausted. Not like the excited lottery winner from months earlier. She hugged me and cried. I'm sorry, Dad. For a long moment, we stood there in silence. Then I hugged her back. Because no matter what happened, she was still my daughter. What I learned: money changes people. Sometimes it makes them greedy. Sometimes it simply reveals who they were all along. For 8 years I gave my daughter and her husband a home without asking for anything in return. The moment fortune arrived, one of them forgot what family meant. But the other one eventually remembered. As for me, I'm still here, in the same house I worked my entire life to build. And now the doors are open only to people who understand something more valuable than $95 million. Respect, gratitude, and family.